Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Salvatore Garner had always believed that success was earned through discipline, strategy, and unwavering determination. At 42, he embodied those principles. Standing 6 feet tall with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing, Sal had built Garner Security Solutions from the ground up, transforming it from a one-man operation into the most trusted private security firm in Chicago. His reputation was built on two things: protecting his clients at all costs and never backing down from a fight. The mahogany-paneled office on the 34th floor of the Prudential Building reflected his journey. Awards lined the walls alongside photos with politicians, celebrities, and corporate executives whose lives he'd safeguarded. But the centerpiece wasn't a business accolade. It was a framed photo of his 18-year-old son, Matthew Garner, in his Westfield Academy graduation gown, that brilliant smile that could light up any room. "Dad, you worry too much," Matthew had said just 3 weeks ago, laughing as Sal reviewed his college security protocols for Northwestern University. "I'm not some senator's kid who needs bodyguards. I can take care of myself." But Sal's protective instincts ran deeper than professional habit. Matthew was his legacy, his pride, the one pure thing in a world that had shown Sal every shade of darkness. Raised by his wife Nicole Garner, a former federal prosecutor turned law professor, Matthew had inherited his mother's sharp intellect and his father's moral compass. Nicole, 40, still turned heads with her auburn hair and fierce green eyes, though those eyes had softened considerably since leaving the prosecutor's office 5 years ago. She'd seen enough corruption, enough plea deals that let monsters walk free, enough victims denied justice. Teaching law at DePaul University allowed her to shape the next generation of attorneys while maintaining her sanity. The Garner household had always been a sanctuary of intellectual debate and moral clarity. Dinner conversations ranged from constitutional law to security protocols, with Matthew holding his own against two formidable minds. He was planning to study journalism at Northwestern, driven by an idealistic belief that truth and transparency could change the world. Someone has to hold people accountable, Matthew had argued during their last family dinner. Too many people with power think they're untouchable. Sal had smiled at his son's passion, recognizing his younger self in those words. Before building his security empire, Sal had spent 8 years as a Chicago police detective, specializing in organized crime. He learned that the most dangerous enemies weren't the obvious criminals. They were the ones who wore suits, shook hands, and smiled while destroying lives from positions of trust. That insight had made him wealthy. Garner Security Solutions didn't just provide bodyguards. They offered comprehensive threat assessment, background investigations, and strategic security planning. Sal's client list read like a who's who of Chicago's elite: CEOs, judges, politicians, and old money families who understood that true power required protection. But with success came enemies. Sal had disrupted more than one criminal enterprise, exposed corporate espionage, and sent several prominent figures to prison through his investigations. He maintained detailed files on potential threats, updated security protocols quarterly, and never let his guard down completely, which made what happened next all the more devastating. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Sal was reviewing security footage from a client's warehouse when his phone buzzed. Nicole stirred beside him in bed, her professor's instinct always alert for late-night emergencies. "Mr. Garner, this is Officer Diana Carver with the Chicago Police Department. I need to inform you about your son, Matthew." The world tilted. Sal's hand tightened on the phone as every worst-case scenario he'd ever imagined flashed through his mind. Kidnapping, revenge against his family, a client's enemy targeting his weakness. What happened? His voice remained steady, the professional mask intact even as his heart hammered. "There's been an accident on Lakeshore Drive. I need you and your wife to come to Northwestern Memorial Hospital immediately." The 20-minute drive passed in crystalline clarity. Sal noticed every streetlight, every late-night pedestrian, Every detail his mind could catalog to avoid thinking about the unthinkable. Nicole gripped his hand, her prosecutor's composure cracking only in the tremor of her fingers. They prepared for many threats over the years. Home invasion, kidnapping, corporate espionage targeting their family. They'd installed the best security systems money could buy, varied their routines, and taught Matthew situational awareness for childhood. But they'd never prepared for this. Chapter 2. The Unthinkable. Northwestern Memorial's trauma center smelled of antiseptic and desperation. The fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh, unforgiving white as Sal and Nicole hurried through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Officer Diana Carver, a composed woman in her 30s with kind eyes that had seen too much, met them at the trauma bay entrance. "Mr. and Mrs. Garner, I'm very sorry for your loss." The words hit like physical blows. Nicole's knees buckled, and Sal caught her, his own world fragmenting even as his body moved on autopilot. "Loss. Past tense. Final. I need to see him," Nicole whispered, her voice hollow. The next hour blurred together in a nightmare of official procedures and devastating details. Matthew had been driving north on Lakeshore Drive around 11:15 p.m. when his BMW had veered off the road near the Oak Street curve, striking the concrete barrier at 70 miles per hour. The impact had been catastrophic. He was alone in the vehicle. Officer Carver explained gently. No other cars were involved. Preliminary investigation suggests he lost control on the curve. Sal's detective instincts kicked in even through the grief. Weather conditions? Clear skies, dry road. No evidence of mechanical failure. We'll know more after the full investigation. They were led to a small family room where Matthew lay on a gurney, covered by a white sheet. Nicole collapsed beside their son, her anguished cries echoing off the sterile walls. Sal stood frozen, staring at the face that had been animated with laughter just hours ago at dinner. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Matthew had been accepted to Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism. Full scholarship, the world spread out before him like a map of infinite possibilities. He'd been excited about his first investigative journalism class, already planning exposé pieces on campus corruption and city politics. "We found his personal effects at the scene," Officer Carver said quietly, handing Sal a plastic evidence bag. His wallet, keys, and cell phone. The phone was recovered about 15 feet from the vehicle. Through his grief, Sal registered an important detail. The phone screen was cracked but still functional. Matthew's last text conversation was visible. Messages with his best friend, Zachary Woodard, from earlier that evening. Matthew 10 verse 47 p.m. "Something's not right, man. I think I'm being watched." Zachary, 10:48 p.m. "Paranoid much? You've been watching too much true crime with your dad." Matthew 10 verse 52 p.m. "I'm serious. Same car has been behind me for 20 minutes. Different routes." Zachary 10:54 p.m. "Where are you now?" Matthew 11:08 p.m. "If you're reading this, tell my dad to check the CCTV I put in my room." Sal's blood turned to ice. Matthew had installed surveillance in his own room. His son had felt threatened enough to take precautions, and Sal had missed the signs completely. The final timestamp was 11:11 p.m., 6 minutes before the estimated time of the crash. "Officer Carver," Sal said, his voice cutting through Nicole's sobs. "I need you to treat this as more than an accident. My son was being followed." The officer's expression shifted, professional interest replacing routine sympathy. "What makes you say that?" Sal showed her the text messages. "My son doesn't panic. He doesn't imagine threats. If he said he was being watched, then someone was watching him. And this message about CCTV." He trailed off, mind racing. "I need to get home. Now." "Sir, I understand you're looking for answers, but grief can make us." "I'm not some bereaved parent grasping at conspiracy theories," Sal interrupted, his voice gaining the edge that had intimidated countless suspects. "I'm a former Chicago detective who runs the largest private security firm in the city. My son was murdered, and the evidence is in my house." Officer Carver studied him for a long moment, recognizing the steel beneath the grief. "I'll follow you home." If there's evidence of foul play, we'll pursue it. The drive back to their Lincoln Park brownstone took an eternity. Sal's mind cataloged every case he'd worked, every enemy he'd made, everyone who might want to hurt his family. The list was longer than he cared to admit. Nicole rode in silence, clutching Matthew's phone like a lifeline. The reality hadn't fully hit her yet. Sal recognized the signs of shock from his police days. The real grief would come later, in waves that would nearly drown them both. But first, he had to know the truth. Chapter 3. The Discovery. The Garner brownstone stood like a fortress on North Cleveland Avenue, its 3 stories of red brick and limestone facade concealing the most advanced residential security system in Chicago. Motion sensors, camera networks, reinforced entry points, and a safe room that could withstand a small siege, all designed by a man who understood that enemies came in many forms. Sal disabled the alarm system with trembling fingers, muscle memory guiding him through the familiar routine while his mind reeled with possibilities. Officer Carver followed, her hand resting unconsciously on her service weapon as she surveyed the sophisticated security setup. "Impressive system," she observed. "Your son grew up understanding operational security. Which makes his behavior tonight even more significant," Sal replied, leading them upstairs to Matthew's room. He wouldn't have panicked without cause. Matthew's room occupied the entire 3rd floor, converted from the original servants' quarters into a teenager's sanctuary. Vintage journalism posters lined the walls. Woodward and Bernstein, Edward R. Murrow, Ida B. Wells, alongside modern tech equipment that would make most college students jealous. A standing desk held dual monitors, professional-grade cameras, and editing equipment for Matthew's documentary projects. But Sal's attention focused on a small device mounted discreetly in the corner near the ceiling. It looked like a standard smoke detector, but he recognized the telltale lens of a high-end surveillance camera. When did he install this? Sal muttered, pulling out his phone to access the camera's wireless feed. And why didn't he tell us? The camera was connected to a hidden server tucked behind Matthew's bookshelf. Professional-grade equipment, not some teen spy toy. Sal felt a mixture of pride and concern. His son had inherited more than just moral conviction. Officer Carver watched as Sal navigated the digital interface. "How long has this been recording?" "Based on the file sizes, looks like continuous recording for the past 2 weeks." Sal's frown deepened. This was planned, not paranoid impulse. The footage began 2 weeks ago, showing Matthew's normal routine, studying, video calls with friends, working on journalism projects. But on night 4, something changed. Matthew's behavior became furtive, checking his window frequently, taking calls in whispered tones. "There," Nicole said suddenly, her prosecutor's eye-catching details. Night 6. Look at his desk. The video showed Matthew researching something intensively, multiple browser windows open simultaneously. Legal documents, property records, financial filings, the kind of deep investigative work that had made Nicole's career. He was investigating someone, Officer Carver observed. This looks like case preparation. But the breakthrough came on night 10. Matthew was on his laptop when he suddenly froze, staring at something on his screen. He immediately grabbed his phone and made a call, pacing frantically. The audio was too distant to understand, but his body language screamed alarm. "Can we enhance the computer screen?" Nicole asked. See what he was looking at? Sal fast-forwarded through the remaining footage, watching his son's growing paranoia unfold. Matthew had started varying his sleep schedule, checking the windows obsessively, and most tellingly, he'd begun backing up files to multiple encrypted drives. Then came the final night, just hours ago, though it felt like years. The timestamp read 9:30 p.m. as Matthew entered his room, immediately moving to his desk. This time, the computer screen was angled toward the camera. What they saw made Sal's blood freeze. Matthew had been researching Kent Maddox, a prominent Chicago real estate developer and longtime family friend. But these weren't casual searches. Matthew had uncovered property fraud, illegal demolitions, and what appeared to be a systematic scheme to displace low-income residents through intimidation and violence. Jesus Christ. Officer Carver whispered. Your son found something big. The footage showed Matthew printing documents, filling a manila envelope, and hiding it in his closet. But at 10:15 p.m., his phone buzzed with a text that changed everything. They watched Matthew's face drain of color as he read the message. He immediately grabbed his keys and headed for the door, but not before looking directly into the camera and mouthing 3 words, "Find the truth." He knew he was in danger, Nicole said, her voice barely controlled. He knew, and he still left. Sal was already searching Matthew's closet, finding the hidden envelope behind his winter coats. Inside were printed emails, property records, and photographs documenting systematic corruption that reached into City Hall, the police department, and the construction industry. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note in Matthew's careful script. Dad, if you're reading this, then Kent Maddox figured out what I discovered. He's been destroying neighborhoods for profit, using violence and intimidation. The Riverside Gardens demolition wasn't legal. He forged the paperwork and bribed officials. 3 families died in those fires he set to clear the land. I have proof, but he has too many people in his pocket. Watch yourself. He's not the man we thought he was. Officer Carver read over Sal's shoulder, her expression grim. This is motive for murder. Kent Maddox, isn't he some big-shot developer? More than that, Sal said quietly, his grief transforming into something harder and more dangerous. He's my daughter's godfather, Nicole's law school study partner. He's been to every birthday party, every Christmas dinner. We trusted him with our family. The betrayal cut deeper than the grief. Kent Maddox hadn't just killed Matthew. He'd used 20 years of friendship to position himself for the perfect murder. He knew their routines, their security protocols, their blind spots. But he'd underestimated Salvatore Garner's capacity for revenge. Officer Carver, Sal said, his voice carrying the cold precision that had made him legendary in Chicago's criminal underworld. I need you to start an official investigation. Document everything we've found here. What about you? She asked, recognizing the shift in his demeanor. Sal was already mentally cataloging Kent Maddox's vulnerabilities, his business relationships, his security arrangements. The plan was forming, piece by piece, move by countermove. I'm going to do what the system can't, he said quietly. I'm going to get justice for my son. Chapter 4. The Investigation. The next 72 hours passed in a haze of funeral preparations and quiet investigation. To the outside world, Salvatore Garner was a grieving father making arrangements for his son's memorial service. In reality, he was methodically building a case for revenge that would have impressed his former colleagues at Chicago PD. Garner Security Solutions' downtown office became his war room. The conference table disappeared under photographs, financial records, property documents, and surveillance footage. Sal had activated every resource at his disposal. Private investigators, forensic accountants, and former law enforcement contacts who owed him favors. His lieutenant, Edgar Mora, a 20-year veteran of the Chicago PD before joining Garner Security, spread out the preliminary findings like a general planning a campaign. Kent Maddox is dirty as hell, but he's smart about it, Edgar reported. Shell companies, offshore accounts, layers of bureaucratic insulation. He's been running this property scheme for at least 5 years. Sal studied the organizational chart Edgar had constructed. Maddox Development sat at the center of a web connecting city planning commissioners, building inspectors, and key figures in the mayor's office. The Riverside Gardens project was just the tip of an iceberg that involved millions in fraudulent development deals. What about the families who died in those fires? Sal asked. 3 separate incidents over 6 months, Edgar continued. The Hernandez family, father, mother, 2 children. Maria Santos, elderly woman who refused to sell her house. And James Wheeler, disabled veteran who was organizing tenant resistance. Each name hit Sal like a physical blow. Matthew had died trying to expose a monster who'd been murdering innocent people while shaking hands at Christmas dinner. The fires were all ruled accidents or electrical problems, Edgar said. But look at this. He slid over a series of photographs showing similar burn patterns, identical accelerant residue, and the same cover-up techniques. This is the work of a professional arsonist. Nicole entered the conference room carrying coffee and wearing the expression she perfected during her prosecutor days. Controlled fury barely contained by legal discipline. "I've been reviewing the official investigation," she announced. "Kent has 3 aldermen and a district attorney on his payroll." The fix was in before Matthew even started asking questions. "How do we prove it?" Sal asked. "We don't," Nicole replied, her green eyes flashing with dangerous intensity. "Not through legal channels. Kent has too many people protecting him, and the evidence is circumstantial at best. Even if we could get him arrested, he'd be out on bail within hours." Sal nodded grimly. He'd expected as much. The system that had failed Matthew would fail them too. "So we do this our way," he said quietly. Edgar leaned forward, recognizing the tone. During their police days, that particular inflection in Sal's voice had preceded some of their most unorthodox investigations, the kind that bent rules and crossed lines but always got results. "What are you thinking, boss?" Sal walked to the window, overlooking downtown Chicago. Kent Maddox's office building was visible 6 blocks away, its glass and steel facade glinting in the afternoon sun like a monument to corruption. "Kent thinks he's untouchable because he controls the system," Sal said. "Politicians, police, prosecutors, he's got everyone bought and paid for. But he made one critical mistake." "What's that?" Nicole asked. Sal turned back to face them, and Edgar recognized the expression from their old days hunting Chicago's worst predators. It was the look of a man who'd found his prey's weakness. "He forgot that I don't work for the system anymore. I am my own system." Over the next week, Sal put that system to work with surgical precision. His investigators documented Kent's entire operation: properties, shell companies, bank accounts, and a network of officials taking his bribes. They identified Kent's enforcers, his arsonist, and his money laundering operation. But more importantly, they identified his routine. Kent Maddox was a creature of habit, which made him predictable. Every Tuesday at 7 p.m., he met with his inner circle at Giuseppe's, an upscale Italian restaurant he owned through a shell company. The meetings took place in a private dining room with no security cameras and minimal witnesses, perfect for discussing illegal activities. "Security is light," reported Steve Lacey, one of Sal's best operatives. 2 bodyguards, both ex-cops who got kicked off the force for taking bribes. "They're lazy, overconfident, and not expecting trouble from someone like you." Sal studied the restaurant's floor plans, noting entrances, exits, and blind spots. Giuseppe's had been designed for privacy, which would work in his favor. "What about surveillance?" he asked. "Kent owns the building and controls the camera system. He turns off recording during his Tuesday meetings." "Perfect." Kent's paranoia about documenting his crimes would eliminate evidence of Sal's presence. "I need 2 weeks to set this up properly," Sal told Edgar. "I want everyone in Kent's organization identified and isolated. When I move against him, I don't want any loose ends coming back to hurt innocent people." But even as he planned, Sal felt the weight of what he was contemplating. Crossing this line would change everything. There would be no going back to his old life, no pretending he was just a security consultant who played by society's rules. Nicole found him that night in Matthew's room, staring at the surveillance footage of their son's final hours. "I know what you're planning," she said quietly, settling beside him on Matthew's bed. "The legal system failed him, Nicole. It's going to fail those other families too. Someone has to hold Kent accountable." "I'm not trying to stop you," she said, surprising him. "I'm trying to help you do it right." She handed him a flash drive, bank records, communication intercepts, and witness statements from Kent's victims. Everything I could gather through back channels and old contacts. Sal looked at his wife, the former prosecutor who dedicated her career to justice through legal means, and saw the same cold determination that had made her legendary in Chicago's courtrooms. "Matthew got this from me," she continued. "That relentless pursuit of truth, that refusal to let powerful people escape consequences. If the courts won't give us justice, then we'll create our own." As they sat together in their dead son's room, surrounded by evidence of Kent Maddox's crimes, Sal felt the final pieces of his plan clicking into place. Kent had made this personal when he'd murdered Matthew. Now Sal would show him just how dangerous it was to threaten a Garner family member. The war was about to begin. Chapter 5. The Setup. Giuseppe's restaurant occupied the ground floor of a renovated warehouse in Chicago's River North District, its brick facade and warmly lit windows projecting an image of old-world authenticity. But Sal knew better as he studied the building from across the street, cataloging security measures and escape routes with the methodical precision of a professional predator. 2 weeks of surveillance had revealed Kent Maddox's patterns down to the minute. Every Tuesday at 7 p.m. sharp, Kent's black Mercedes would pull into the alley behind Giuseppe's. His 2 bodyguards, Dan Duke and Mitch Warren, both disgraced ex-cops who'd found lucrative employment in Kent's organization, would sweep the restaurant before allowing their boss inside. The private dining room on the second floor became Kent's war room for planning his next wave of property acquisitions. Maps of target neighborhoods, lists of stubborn tenants, and carefully coded discussions about encouraging people to relocate filled these sessions. Sal's investigation had identified Kent's entire inner circle. Jessica Hart, a corrupt city planning commissioner who rubber-stamped illegal demolition permits. Adam Massey, the arsonist responsible for the Riverside Gardens fires. And Sean Sparks, an alderman who blocked any investigations into Kent's activities. Each name now had a file in Sal's war room, complete with addresses, routines, weaknesses, and most importantly, the evidence needed to destroy their lives. But tonight was about Kent. Sal checked his watch, 6:45 p.m. In 15 minutes, Kent would arrive for his weekly strategy session. The other attendees would follow at 5-minute intervals, a security protocol designed to minimize exposure. By 7:30, they'd all be gathered in that soundproof private dining room, isolated from witnesses and surveillance. It was perfect. Sal's earpiece crackled with Edgar's voice from the surveillance van 3 blocks away. Targets are mobile. Kent's Mercedes just left his office building. Copy that, Sal replied, making final adjustments to his equipment. He wore the black tactical gear of his old SWAT days, modified with sound-dampening materials and enhanced body armor. The pistol at his hip was loaded with subsonic rounds that would barely whisper when fired. But the real weapon wasn't the gun, it was information. Sal had spent the past 2 weeks becoming intimately familiar with every aspect of Kent's operation. He knew about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the bribes paid to specific officials, and the detailed records Kent kept of every illegal transaction. That information would serve as both leverage and evidence. First bodyguard just entered the restaurant, Edgar reported. Sweep in progress. Sal moved through the shadows of the alley, approaching Giuseppe's rear entrance with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this countless times before. The lock yielded to his electronic picks in under 30 seconds, a skill learned during his early days as a detective, refined through years of private security work. The restaurant's back stairs led directly to the second floor, bypassing the main dining area where innocent customers were enjoying their meals. Sal had no intention of involving civilians in what was about to happen. Second bodyguard in position at the front entrance. Edgar's voice whispered through the earpiece. Kent's arriving now. Through a crack in the stairwell door, Sal watched Kent Maddox enter the private dining room. At 58, Kent still projected the confident bearing of a man accustomed to getting his way. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of smile that had charmed 3 mayors and countless city officials into looking the other way while he destroyed lives for profit. This was the man who'd sat at their dinner table, who'd held Matthew as a baby, who'd earned 2 decades of trust before using that access to commit the perfect murder. The rage threatened to overwhelm Sal's tactical discipline. He forced himself to breathe, to think, to remember that revenge required precision, not passion. Jessica Hart just arrived, Edgar reported. Adam Massey 2 minutes out. Sal moved into position outside the dining room, his back pressed against the wall as he listened to Kent's voice through the thin door. The Bridgeport project is moving ahead of schedule. We should have the remaining tenants cleared out by month's end. What about the Rodriguez family? A woman's voice asked, Jessica Hart, the corrupt commissioner. They're still refusing to sell. Adam will handle it, Kent replied casually. Same as always. Make it look accidental. They were planning another murder, discussing it as casually as ordering wine. Sal's hand tightened on his pistol, but he forced himself to wait. He needed all of them together, needed to record their planning session before making his move. Massey's in the building, Edgar reported. Sparks just pulled up outside. 5 more minutes. Then everyone would be in position for the truth to finally emerge. Sal activated the digital recorder clipped to his tactical vest. Every word spoken in that room would be preserved, documented, and eventually delivered to the few honest officials left in Chicago's power structure. But first, Kent Maddox would face judgment from a father who'd lost everything. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. The private dining room fell silent as Sal stepped through the door, his presence transforming the comfortable criminal conspiracy into something far more dangerous. Kent Maddox froze with a wine glass halfway to his lips, his face cycling through surprise, recognition, and finally, fear. "Evening, Kent," Sal said quietly, closing the door behind him and engaging the lock. "Don't mind me. Please continue your discussion about murdering the Rodriguez family." The other conspirators reacted according to their natures. Jessica Hart, the corrupt commissioner, immediately reached for her purse, probably seeking her phone to call for help. Adam Massey, the arsonist, coiled in his chair like a predator assessing threat levels. Sean Sparks, the alderman, simply stared in bovine confusion. But Kent's response revealed why he'd stayed one step ahead of the law for so many years. After the initial shock, his expression smoothed into the practiced charm that had fooled 2 decades of friends and colleagues. "Sal, what are you doing here? I thought you'd be home with Nicole, grieving for Matthew." The false sympathy in his voice made Sal's finger tighten on the trigger, but he maintained control. "I am grieving," Sal replied, his voice carrying the lethal quiet of a stalking predator. "But I'm also investigating my son's murder." Murder? Kent's performance was Academy Award caliber. The perfect mixture of shock and confusion. The police said it was an accident. Matthew lost control on that curve. After you had him followed and threatened. Sal produced his phone, playing the audio recording of Kent's earlier conversation. "You just admitted planning to kill the Rodriguez family, same as always. How many families have you murdered, Kent?" The dining room's atmosphere shifted as the recordings played. Detailed discussions of arson, bribery, and systematic intimidation filled the space, each word condemning Kent and his associates beyond any possibility of denial. Jessica Hart made her move, lunging for the emergency button installed beneath the table. Sal's training took over, a fluid motion that left her unconscious on the floor before she could raise an alarm. "Jesus Christ," Sean Sparks whispered. "Sal, you need to calm down. We can work this out, like you worked it out with Matthew." Sal's voice cut through the alderman's babbling. "He was 18 years old, Kent. 18. He had his whole life ahead of him, and you killed him because he discovered your property scheme." Kent abandoned his innocent act, his mask finally slipping to reveal the cold calculations underneath. "Your son was naive, Sal. He didn't understand how the world really works. Some people get hurt so that progress can happen. That's just reality." "Reality?" Sal stepped closer, and Kent instinctively recoiled. "Let me share some reality with you. I know about every property you've stolen, every official you've bribed, every family you've displaced or murdered. I know about the Cayman accounts, the shell companies, the arsonist you keep on payroll." He gestured toward Adam Massey. "Mr. Massey here has been very busy. The Hernandez family, Maria Santos, James Wheeler, all burned alive so you could steal their homes." Massey finally spoke, his voice hoarse with barely contained violence. "You're dead, Garner. Soon as I get out of here." "You're not getting out of here," Sal interrupted. "None of you are." The finality in his voice penetrated even Kent's arrogance. "Sal, be reasonable. Yes, we've bent some rules, but bent rules." The fury finally crept into Sal's voice. "You murdered innocent families. You killed my son. You destroyed lives for profit while pretending to be my friend." Sal produced a thick manila envelope from his tactical vest. "This contains copies of everything. Bank records, recorded conversations, witness statements, forensic evidence. Every crime, every bribe, Every murder you've committed. He tossed the envelope onto the table. Your choice is simple, Kent. Confess to Matthew's murder and the Riverside Gardens killings, or watch me destroy every aspect of your life piece by piece. Kent's laugh was bitter and desperate. You think anyone will believe you? I have judges, prosecutors, half the city council in my pocket. You're just a grieving father with a conspiracy theory. Am I? Sal smiled, and something in that expression made Kent's blood freeze. Edgar, send the package. His earpiece crackled with his lieutenant's response. Package sent, boss. FBI Field Office, Chicago Tribune, Channel 7 News, and the U.S. Attorney's Office all received their copies simultaneously. Kent's face went white as the implications hit him. You can't. Already did. By tomorrow morning, your entire operation will be front-page news. Federal investigators will freeze your accounts. Your co-conspirators will be arrested, and every family you victimized will have grounds for wrongful death lawsuits. Sal moved closer, close enough that Kent could see the controlled violence in his steel-gray eyes. But that's just the legal consequences. You kill my son, Kent. That requires a more personal response. The room held its breath as Sal drew his pistol, the subsonic rounds chambered and ready. Kent Maddox, the untouchable developer who'd murdered with impunity, finally understood he was facing judgment from someone beyond his reach. Please, Sal. We were friends. Friends don't murder each other's children. The shot was barely audible, but its impact was permanent. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. Dawn broke over Chicago as Salvatore Garner sat in his study, watching the news coverage unfold across multiple screens. Channel 7's morning anchor spoke in breathless tones about the explosive corruption scandal rocking City Hall, while CNN's Chicago correspondent detailed the federal investigation now consuming Kent Maddox's business empire. But the real satisfaction came from his secure laptop, where he monitored the systematic dismantling of everything Kent had built. The FBI had moved with impressive speed. By 3 a.m., agents were executing search warrants across the city, Kent's offices, his various properties, the homes of his co-conspirators. The Cayman accounts were frozen, the shell companies exposed, and a federal grand jury was already being convened. Edgar Mora entered the study carrying coffee and the morning's intelligence briefing. Jessica Hart was found unconscious in Giuseppe's dining room around midnight. She's talking to federal investigators now, trying to cut a deal. And the others? Adam Massey disappeared sometime after our operation concluded. Sean Sparks is in federal custody, singing like a canary about every bribe he's ever taken. Edgar paused, studying his boss's expression. Kent Maddox was found dead in his office building this morning. Single gunshot wound to the head. Apparent suicide, according to the police report. Sal nodded without emotion. The official story would protect everyone involved while ensuring Kent's crimes dominated the headlines. The Chicago PD had closed the investigation before it began. After all, who would mourn a murderous real estate developer who'd killed innocent families? What about our exposure? Sal asked. Clean. Security cameras at Giuseppe's malfunctioned conveniently between 7:30 and 8:45 p.m. yesterday. No witnesses, no evidence connecting us to Kent's final hours. Officially, he killed himself rather than face federal prosecution. The cover story held up under scrutiny because it made perfect sense. Faced with imminent arrest, asset forfeiture, and life in prison, Kent Maddox had chosen the coward's exit. The media would spend weeks dissecting his crimes, not questioning the circumstances of his death. Nicole appeared in the doorway wearing her black funeral dress, her auburn hair pulled back in the severe style she'd favored during her prosecutorial career. The service starts in 2 hours. Matthew's funeral would take place at St. Alphonsus Church, where he'd been baptized 18 years ago. The same altar where he'd received First Communion, where he'd served as an altar boy, where he'd planned to marry someday and bring his own children for baptism. Instead, they were saying goodbye. Any regrets? Nicole asked quietly, settling beside him on the leather couch where they'd watched Matthew grow from infant to young man. Sal considered the question seriously. He'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, done things that would have horrified his younger, more idealistic self. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Matthew's face on that surveillance footage, mouthing "Find the truth" before walking into Kent's trap. "None," he said finally. The system failed him. It would have failed those other families too. Someone had to hold Kent accountable. And Adam Massey? The arsonist's disappearance hadn't been accidental. Edgar's team had intercepted Massey leaving Giuseppe's, and the man responsible for burning children alive had faced his own reckoning in a warehouse on the south side. His body wouldn't be found for weeks, if ever. He murdered 3 families, Nicole. The Hernandez children were 6 and 8 years old when he burned them alive in their beds. She nodded, her prosecutor's instincts understanding the calculus of justice. Some crimes exceeded the legal system's ability to provide adequate punishment. Some monsters required more direct intervention. The doorbell rang, followed by voices in the hallway. Edgar was greeting the early arrivals for the pre-funeral gathering, colleagues, clients, and Matthew's friends coming to pay their respects. Zachary Woodard was among the first. The young man who'd received Matthew's final text message, still struggling with guilt over not taking his friend's fears seriously. Sal found him standing in Matthew's room, staring at the journalism posters. "I should have believed him," Zachary said without turning around. "When he said he was being followed, I should have." "You couldn't have known," Sal interrupted gently. "Kent fooled everyone, even me. The news is saying he killed himself because of some FBI investigation. They're not mentioning Matthew at all." Sal placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "The FBI investigation exists because of Matthew. He found the evidence that brought Kent down. Your friend saved lives, Zachary. The Rodriguez family won't be murdered now because Matthew exposed Kent's operation. It wasn't the complete truth, but it was a truth Zachary could live with. Sometimes the full story was too complicated, too dark, too final for public consumption." The church service was standing room only, filled with Matthew's classmates, teachers, family friends, and colleagues from Sal's business. The priest spoke about a young man taken too soon, about faith during dark times, about justice eventually prevailing. As they lowered Matthew's casket into the ground, Sal felt the weight of what he'd done and what he'd lost. His son was gone forever, that brilliant smile extinguished by a monster's greed. No amount of revenge could bring Matthew back or fill the hole in their hearts. But Kent Maddox was dead, his criminal empire destroyed, and the families he'd threatened were safe. In the arithmetic of justice, that had to be enough. As the mourners dispersed, Nicole took Sal's hand. "What now?" He looked across Lincoln Park Cemetery toward downtown Chicago, where federal agents were still unraveling the corruption that had poisoned the city's government. Kent's death was just the beginning. His co-conspirators would face trials. His victims would receive compensation, and his properties would be returned to the communities he destroyed. "Now we rebuild," Sal said quietly. "We make sure Matthew's sacrifice meant something." The war was over, but its consequences would echo through Chicago's power structure for years to come. Salvatore Garner had kept his promise to his son. He'd found the truth and ensured it saw daylight. Justice, he reflected, sometimes required stepping outside the law to preserve it. Chapter 8. The Cleanup. 3 weeks after Matthew's funeral, Salvatore Garner stood in the penthouse conference room of the federal building, watching Assistant U.S. Attorney Margaret Blair present the government's case against the Maddox corruption network. The evidence spread across multiple tables painted a picture of systematic criminality that had infected Chicago's government for years. 18 indictments so far, Margaret announced to the assembled task force of FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and Chicago PD internal affairs investigators. We're looking at RICO charges, murder conspiracies, arson, bribery, and money laundering. This is the biggest public corruption case in Chicago since Operation Silver Shovel. Sal sat in the back of the room, officially present as a consultant on security matters, but actually monitoring the investigation's progress. His decision to leak the evidence simultaneously to law enforcement and media had created unstoppable momentum. Even Chicago's notoriously corrupt political machine couldn't suppress a story this explosive. Agent Ruth Jones, the FBI's lead investigator, addressed the room with the clinical precision of someone who'd spent her career dismantling criminal enterprises. Kent Maddox's suicide prevented us from flipping him against his political contacts, but his records were meticulous. We have documented proof of bribes paid to 3 aldermen, 2 city commissioners, and a Cook County judge. The suicide story had held up perfectly. Kent's apparent guilt and desperation provided a neat explanation that satisfied media curiosity while protecting Sal's involvement. The official investigation focused on the corruption scheme itself, not the circumstances of Kent's death. But Sal knew the real cleanup was just beginning. Edgar Mora found him in the parking garage after the briefing, carrying a tablet loaded with surveillance reports. Adam Massey's body was discovered this morning in a construction site on the south side. Apparent drug overdose, according to the preliminary investigation. The official story wasn't technically false. Massey had indeed died from an injection, though the substance involved wasn't recreational narcotics. Edgar's team had been thorough and professional, ensuring the arsonist responsible for multiple family murders faced appropriate consequences. Any complications? Sal asked. None. Massey had a history of substance abuse and had been increasingly erratic since the FBI investigation began. His death looks consistent with someone spiraling out of control after their criminal empire collapsed. They walked to Sal's car in comfortable silence, 2 professionals who understood that some jobs required actions beyond legal boundaries. Edgar had been Sal's partner during their police years, had seen the same victims failed by plea bargains and technicalities, had watched guilty men walk free while their victims suffered. Neither man felt any moral conflict about Adam Massey's fate. The drive back to Garner Security Solutions took them through the Riverside Gardens neighborhood where Kent's scheme had begun. The area showed signs of renewal. Community gardens where burned buildings once stood, new affordable housing under construction, families returning to streets they'd been forced to abandon. The Rodriguez family decided to stay, Edgar reported. Federal investigators froze the demolition orders and returned their property rights. They're planning to rebuild. Small victories, but meaningful ones. Matthew's investigation had saved lives and preserved communities that would have been destroyed by Kent's greed. At the office, Sal found Nicole waiting in his private conference room, surrounded by legal documents and wearing the focused expression that had made her legendary in Chicago's courthouses. The wrongful death settlements are moving forward, she announced without preamble. Families affected by Kent's arson scheme will receive compensation from the federal asset forfeiture. It won't bring back their loved ones, but it will help them rebuild. Sal studied the papers, legal briefs, victim impact statements, and forensic accountings of Kent's stolen wealth. The federal government was doing its job, ensuring Kent's victims received some measure of justice through the courts. But justice for Matthew remained personal. Any word on the remaining co-conspirators? Sal asked. Jessica Hart is cooperating fully with federal investigators. She'll likely receive a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony against the others. Sean Sparks is refusing to cooperate. His corruption charges will likely result in 15 to 20 years. The legal system was grinding forward with its usual measured pace, building cases that would stand up in court and survive appeals. It was necessary work, but insufficient for Sal's purposes. Some crimes demanded more immediate consequences. That evening, Sal drove to St. Alphonsus Church for the memorial mass Nicole had organized for Matthew's 1-month anniversary. The same altar where they'd said goodbye now hosted a celebration of his life. Friends sharing memories, teachers discussing his potential, classmates reading from his journalism projects. Zachary Woodard approached Sal after the service, carrying a printed manuscript bound in black leather. I've been working on this since the funeral, Zachary explained. A complete account of Matthew's investigation, everything he discovered about Kent's operation. I want to submit it to journalism schools, maybe get published. Sal accepted the manuscript, feeling its weight both physical and symbolic. Matthew's revelation, how an 18-year-old journalist exposed Chicago's biggest corruption scandal. He deserves credit for bringing Kent down, Zachary continued. The FBI might have gotten the evidence, but Matthew found it first. He died trying to expose the truth. It was a sanitized version of events, but an important one. Matthew's sacrifice needed to be remembered and honored, his courage recognized by the journalism community he'd hoped to join. "I'll make sure this gets to the right people," Sal promised, meaning editors at major newspapers who owed him favors and journalism professors who understood the importance of protecting young investigators. Walking home through Lincoln Park, Sal reflected on the past month's events. Kent Maddox was dead, his criminal empire destroyed, his co-conspirators facing federal prosecution. The families he'd threatened were safe, his victims were receiving compensation, and his corruption had been exposed for the world to see. But the larger system remained unchanged. Other Kent Maddoxes were operating in other cities, protected by other networks of corrupt officials. The institutional failures that had allowed such crimes to flourish continued unchallenged. Matthew's death had resulted in justice for his specific case, but it hadn't reformed the system that had failed him. That would require a different kind of war, fought on different battlefields with different weapons. Sal was ready for that war too. Chapter 9. The Legacy. 6 months after Matthew's death, Salvatore Garner stood before the marble headstone that marked his son's final resting place. The inscription was simple: Matthew Garner, journalist, truth seeker, beloved son. Below that, a quote Matthew had kept on his desk: "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." Fresh flowers adorned the grave. Sunflowers, Matthew's favorite, placed there by Nicole during her weekly visits. Sal's visits were less frequent, but more intense. Moments of communication with the son who'd inspired a transformation he was still understanding. The Chicago skyline stretched before him, glass and steel monuments to commerce and power that concealed the ongoing corruption investigations triggered by Matthew's work. Federal prosecutors had secured convictions against 14 officials in the Maddox network, with more trials scheduled throughout the year. But Sal's attention focused on a different kind of monument: the bronze plaque recently installed at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. The Matthew Garner Memorial Fellowship would fund investigative journalism projects that exposed corruption and protected vulnerable communities. It was Nicole's idea, a way to channel their grief into something constructive that honored their son's ideals. The first recipient is a young woman from Detroit. Nicole's voice came from behind him. She approached carrying a bouquet of white roses, her weekly tribute to the child they'd lost. She's investigating housing discrimination in federal programs. Sal accepted the flowers, adding them to Matthew's growing memorial garden. Other families had begun leaving tributes. The Rodriguez family brought handwritten thank you notes. The Riverside Gardens community placed small American flags, and Matthew's classmates left copies of their own investigative articles. "Any regrets about how we handled Kent?" Nicole asked, settling beside him on the stone bench Sal had installed. The question came up occasionally during their private conversations, usually triggered by news coverage of the ongoing federal prosecutions. The media had canonized Kent Maddox as a cautionary tale of corruption and suicide, never suspecting the truth about his final hours. "None," Sal replied, meaning it completely. The legal system would have failed Matthew, just like it failed Kent's other victims. Some people can only be stopped through direct action. Nicole nodded, her prosecutor's instincts understanding the calculus they'd applied. Kent Maddox had murdered children, destroyed families, and corrupted an entire city's government for profit. His death had saved lives and prevented future atrocities that the courts might never have adequately punished. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the city Matthew had hoped to help reform through journalism. His dreams of exposing corruption and holding powerful people accountable had been realized, just not in the way he'd imagined. Edgar Moore's voice crackled through Sal's secure phone, pulling him back to present concerns. "Boss, we have a situation developing in Milwaukee. Real estate developer named Jeffrey Rice is using similar tactics to Kent Maddox: property fraud, intimidation, suspicious fires." Sal felt the familiar surge of cold calculation that had served him so well during the Kent Maddox operation. "Send me everything you have. Full background, associates, financial records, the works." already compiling the files. This looks like another multi-year scheme with political connections. Local law enforcement is either compromised or overwhelmed. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Powerful criminals hiding behind legitimate business facades while destroying lives for profit. The legal system would eventually catch up to Jeffrey Rice, but how many families would suffer while prosecutors built their cases? "Nicole," Sal said quietly, "how would you feel about expanding our operations?" She understood immediately. During their marriage, Nicole had learned to read the subtle shift in his voice that preceded particularly dangerous decisions. "You're thinking about Milwaukee. I'm thinking about all of them. Kent wasn't Maddox unique. There are dozens of criminals just like him operating in cities across the country, using the same tactics, buying the same protections, victimizing the same." Nicole considered this, her legal mind weighing implications and consequences. The federal system is reactive, not proactive. By the time prosecutors build cases against people like Kent, they've already destroyed dozens of lives. "But we could be proactive," Sal continued. "Garner Security Solutions has resources and capabilities that law enforcement doesn't. We could identify these operations early, gather evidence, and ensure appropriate consequences before more families get hurt." It was vigilantism on an organized scale, justice delivered outside legal channels by people who understood that some crimes exceeded the system's ability to provide adequate punishment. The moral complexity didn't escape either of them, but neither did the practical necessity. "What about Matthew's memory?" Nicole asked. He believed in legitimate journalism, legal procedures, working within the system. Sal looked at his son's headstone, remembering the young man who died, trying to expose corruption through proper channels. Matthew believed in truth and justice. The methods matter less than the results. Over the following weeks, Sal quietly restructured Garner Security Solutions to accommodate his new mission. A special division was created, officially focused on corporate security consulting, but actually identifying and neutralizing organized corruption schemes before they could destroy communities. The team included Edgar Mora, now promoted to Director of Special Operations, Steve Lacey, a former Army Ranger who specialized in surveillance and intelligence gathering, and a network of freelance operatives with backgrounds in law enforcement, military special operations, and private security. Their first target was indeed Jeffrey Rice in Milwaukee, whose property development scheme had already displaced 3 families and resulted in 2 suspicious building fires. The evidence Edgar's team gathered painted a familiar picture: bribes to city officials, intimidation of resistant tenants, and systematic fraud designed to steal valuable urban properties. But unlike Kent Maddox, Jeffrey Rice would face consequences before murdering innocent families. The operation took place on a cold Thursday evening in November. Rice was meeting with his arsonist and 2 corrupt aldermen in a private club downtown, planning the destruction of a historic apartment building whose elderly tenants had refused to relocate. Sal's team documented everything: recorded conversations, financial transfers, detailed plans for arson and murder. But instead of waiting for federal prosecutors to build their case, they took immediate action. Jeffrey Rice was found dead in his office the next morning, apparent suicide just hours before FBI agents arrived with search warrants. His co-conspirators were arrested based on evidence anonymously delivered to federal investigators, and the targeted apartment building remained safe. The pattern repeated itself in Detroit, Cleveland, and Phoenix over the following year. Corrupt developers, murderous slumlords, and their political enablers all faced the same fate: exposure, prosecution, and when necessary, more direct consequences. The media began calling it the corruption plague, a wave of suicides among real estate developers facing federal investigation. Law enforcement noted the pattern but found no evidence connecting the deaths, no indication of outside intervention. Sal's team was that good. Standing at Matthew's grave 1 year after his death, Sal reflected on what they'd accomplished. 14 major corruption schemes had been exposed, 47 officials arrested, and countless families protected from displacement or murder. The legal system was finally catching up, with federal prosecutors creating specialized task forces to investigate real estate fraud and political corruption. Matthew's death had sparked a national conversation about accountability and justice that was slowly reforming how authorities address such crimes. But the real memorial to Matthew Garner wasn't the scholarship fund or the bronze plaque. It was the growing network of families who were alive because Sal had learned to deliver justice outside legal channels, using his son's investigation as a blueprint for protecting the vulnerable from predators in expensive suits. He would be proud, Nicole said, joining him at the gravesite for their weekly visit. Not of the methods, necessarily, but of the results. Communities saved, families protected, justice delivered. Sal nodded, reading the inscription one more time. Matthew had believed that absolute freedom required rebellion against unjust systems. In his own way, Sal was continuing that rebellion, ensuring that powerful criminals could no longer hide behind legal protections and political connections. The war for justice would never end, but at least now it was being fought on more equal terms. Matthew's legacy lived on in every family that remained safe, every community that stayed intact, every criminal who faced consequences for their crimes. It was the kind of journalism that saved lives, even if it never appeared in newspapers. As father and mother walked away from their son's grave, heading back to their city and their mission, neither looked back. The dead were honored by the actions of the living, and there was still work to do. Somewhere in America, another Kent Maddox was planning to destroy innocent families for profit. Salvatore Garner would be ready for him. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.